I didn't mean to fall asleep on a stranger's shoulder, but when you're a single mom running on 3 hours of sleep and two jobs, your body doesn't ask permission. I was on the last bus home, the 11:47 route that smelled like disinfectant and regret. My daughter's kindergarten drawing was crumpled in my bag, another sunshine and stick figure family portrait that I'd smooth out later and pin to our refrigerator like it was a masterpiece, because to me, it was. My feet were screaming from a double shift at the diner, that special kind of pain that starts in your heels and radiates up through your calves until your entire lower body feels like it's been beaten with a hammer. I could still feel the ghost of the greasy tiles under my shoes, still smell the burnt coffee and bacon grease that had soaked into my uniform hours ago. The seat beside me was empty until it wasn't. I felt the weight of someone sitting down, the subtle shift of the bus seat, the displacement of air. Then came the scent. God, that scent. It cut through everything else, through the diesel fumes and stale air and the lingering smell of my own exhaustion. Expensive cologne, the kind you don't buy at a drugstore, the kind that probably costs more than I made in a week. But there was something else underneath it, something darker, leather and smoke, and something I couldn't quite name, but that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't look up. I was too tired to care, too tired to wonder who sits down next to someone on a half-empty bus, too tired to do anything but keep my eyes closed and count down the stops until I could collapse into my own bed. The bus rocked as it pulled away from the curb. The motion was familiar, almost soothing. My eyes grew heavy, that pull of sleep so strong it was physical. Just a few more minutes, I told myself. Just hold on a few more minutes. And then my head dropped sideways onto his shoulder. The realization hit me like cold water. 1 second I was drifting, and the next I was aware, horribly, acutely aware that I was leaning against a complete stranger, that my cheek was pressed against expensive fabric, that I could feel the warmth of another human being through his jacket, feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. I jolted awake maybe 10 seconds later, horrified. "I'm so sorry, The apology was already tumbling from my lips as I pushed myself upright, my face burning with embarrassment. God, what was wrong with me? Who falls asleep on strangers? What kind of person was I becoming? But when I turned to apologize properly, when I finally looked at the man whose personal space I'd just invaded, the words died in my throat. He was watching me. Not annoyed, not disgusted, not with that tight, uncomfortable expression people get when you've crossed an invisible boundary. Just watching. His eyes were dark, so dark they looked black in the dim lighting of the bus, and they were fixed on my face with an intensity that made something in my chest constrict. Dark eyes that seemed to see straight through my exhaustion, through my cheap polyester uniform with the coffee stain I couldn't quite scrub out, through the carefully constructed walls I'd built around myself, through everything I tried so desperately to hide from the world. His jaw was sharp, covered in dark stubble that looked intentional rather than neglectful. His expression was unreadable, controlled in a way that suggested years of practice. And there was something about him, something in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself so perfectly still, the expensive cut of his clothes against the shabby bus seat, that made my pulse skip in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment. He looked dangerous, that was the word that came to mind. Dangerous and beautiful, and completely out of place on the last bus home. "It's fine," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention, the kind of voice that made you stop and listen even when you hadn't meant to. There was a texture to it, rough velvet, and underneath the words I caught the faintest trace of an accent. Italian, maybe. Something that softened the edges and made everything sound more intimate than it should have been. I pulled back, my hand automatically going to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. My hair probably looked like a disaster. I could feel pieces falling out of the bun I twisted it into 14 hours ago. My fingers were still slightly greasy from the diner, and I was suddenly painfully aware of how I must look, how I must smell. Fried food and industrial cleaner and desperation. "I work long hours," I said, the explanation spilling out too fast. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to." Why was I explaining myself? Why did I care what the stranger thought? You look like you needed it. There was no judgment in his tone, no pity either, which somehow made it worse. Just observation. Simple, clean observation. But something about the way he said it, the way those dark eyes stayed fixed on mine like I was the only thing in the world worth looking at, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not since before my ex left, not since the divorce papers and the custody agreements and the slow, agonizing realization that I was going to have to do this alone. Not since I became invisible, just another tired woman in a stained uniform, serving coffee and fake smiles to people who looked through me like I was part of the furniture, like I didn't matter, like I didn't matter. But this man was looking at me like I mattered. My throat felt tight. "Thank you," I managed to whisper. The words came out softer than I'd intended, more vulnerable. I saw something flicker in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition, or something else I couldn't name, but it was gone before I could identify it. He nodded once, slow and deliberate like we'd just made some kind of agreement I didn't understand. Then he went back to staring out the window, his profile sharp against the darkness beyond the glass, and I went back to pretending I wasn't hyper-aware of every breath he took beside me. But I was aware. God, I was so aware of the way he sat so still, like stillness was his natural state, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cold bus, of the scent of him, cologne and leather and smoke, of the space between us, maybe 6 inches that felt charged with something I didn't want to examine. My heart was beating too fast, my skin felt too tight, and I couldn't stop stealing glances at him from the corner of my eye, trying to piece together who this man was, what he did, why he was on the last bus home when everything about him screamed money and power and private cars. The bus lurched to a stop. Mine. Finally. I grabbed my bag, my movements clumsy with exhaustion, and something else, some strange reluctance to leave, which was insane. I didn't know this man. I'd fallen asleep on him and exchanged maybe 20 words. That was it. I stood up, my legs protesting, and made my way down the aisle without looking back. But I felt his eyes on me the entire time, felt them like a physical touch between my shoulder blades as I walked away. That should have been the end of it. One awkward moment on public transit, one of those strong, small encounters you have with strangers that you forget by morning. But I didn't forget. 3 days later, he was on the same bus. I saw him before I got on, saw him through the window, and my heart did this ridiculous leap in my chest. Same expensive clothes, same dark hair, same presence that seemed to fill the space around him, same cologne I caught at the second I stepped on board. I told myself to sit somewhere else, somewhere far away, somewhere that didn't make me feel like a moth drawn to a flame I knew would burn me. Instead, I sat down across the aisle this time, trying to keep distance, trying to maintain some kind of boundary. He glanced over, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Not surprise, not confusion, just recognition, like he'd been expecting me, like he'd been waiting. My heart did this stupid flutter thing I hadn't felt since I was 17. Since before I knew that butterflies in your stomach could turn into knots. Since before I learned that attraction could be dangerous. We rode in silence for 2 stops. The bus was more crowded tonight. A couple of college students, a woman with shopping bags, a man in a security uniform. But I was only aware of him, of the way he kept stealing glances at me when he thought I wasn't looking, of the way I kept doing the same thing. "Long day?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice carried across the aisle easily, and I turned to face him fully for the first time since I'd sat down. I laughed, the sound tired and honest and maybe a little bitter. "Is there any other kind?" The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close, something that softened the harsh lines of his face and made him look almost human instead of dangerously beautiful. "Not for people like us," he said. People like us. The phrase hit me harder than it should have, as if he knew what it was like to be tired down to your bones, as if he understood what it meant to keep moving because stopping meant falling apart, as if there was some invisible thread connecting his exhaustion to mine, his struggle to mine, his life to mine. But that was crazy. This man with his expensive clothes and controlled voice and air of danger. He couldn't possibly understand my life, couldn't understand what it was like to choose between buying groceries and paying the electric bill, couldn't understand what it was like to smile through a shift when your feet hurt so bad you want to cry. Could he? I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand an explanation, wanted to understand why he kept showing up, why he kept looking at me like that, why he seemed to see something in me that no one else did. But my stop came, announced by the automated voice and the hiss of the doors opening, and I left without another word, my skin still warm from the brief conversation, my mind racing with questions I didn't have the courage to ask. After that, it became a pattern. Same bus, same time, same two strangers orbiting each other like planets caught in each other's gravity. We'd sit near each other, exchange a few words, nothing deep, nothing dangerous, just moments. Small, careful moments that felt bigger than they should have. He'd ask how my day was, and I'd give him the honest answer instead of the polite lie I gave everyone else. Exhausting. My feet hurt and I dropped a tray of dishes, and I'm pretty sure I smiled so much my face might be permanently stuck like this. He'd almost smile at that. Fake smiles are the hardest work. What about you? I'd ask back. How was your day? Long, he'd say, or complicated, or better now. Always vague, always keeping details locked behind those dark eyes. He never gave specifics, always kept things carefully ambiguous, but there was something in the way he listened, really listened, leaning in slightly, his full attention focused on my words, like they mattered, like I mattered, like I was more than just a waitress, more than just a struggling single mom, more than just invisible. The routine continued for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of brief conversations and stolen glances, and a tension that built slowly, steadily, like water heating to a boil. Then came the rainy evening. I was soaked. The diner's owner had asked me to stay late again, and by the time I left, the rain was coming down in sheets. I'd run the 2 blocks to the bus stop without an umbrella, and by the time I got on the bus, I was dripping. My uniform clung to my skin. My hair was plastered to my face. I probably looked like a drowned rat. But he was there. Same seat, same dark eyes that tracked me the moment I stepped on board. I slid into the seat across from him, shivering slightly, trying to wring out my hair without making too much of a mess. "Bad night?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like concern. "You could say that." He shrugged out of his jacket, expensive, black, leather, and held it out to me. I stared at it. "I can't. You're freezing. It's designer. I'll ruin it." "I don't care." The certainty in his voice made me look up, made me meet those dark eyes, and what I saw there made my breath catch. He meant it. He genuinely didn't care about the jacket. He cared about me? I took it, wrapped it around my shoulders. It smelled like him, cologne and leather and smoke, and it was still warm from his body heat. I pulled it tighter, feeling something in my chest crack open just a little. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, and we rode in silence for a few stops. Comfortable silence, the kind you can only have with someone who understands that words aren't always necessary. Then I did something brave, something I'd been thinking about for 3 weeks but hadn't had the courage to do. "What's your name?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the bus windows. "I mean, I've been sharing a bus with you for 3 weeks. I should probably know your name." He hesitated, actually hesitated, like the question was complicated, like his name was somehow dangerous to share. A muscle ticked in his jaw, and for a second I thought he might not answer at all. "Dante," he said finally. The name fit him, dark, Italian, beautiful, and dangerous all at once. "I'm Mara." "I know," he said softly. I blinked, confusion, and something else, something that felt like warmth spreading through my chest. "How?" He gestured to the name tag still pinned to my uniform, the one I'd forgotten I was wearing, the one I always forgot I was wearing, because after a while, it just became part of the outfit, part of the costume I wore to survive. I'd forgotten I was wearing it, but something about the way he said it, "I know," made me feel like he'd known for a while, like he'd been paying attention, like he'd noticed not just my name tag, but everything about me. The way I rubbed my temples when I was tired, the way I always sat in the same spot, the way I carried Emma's drawings like they were precious. Like he'd been watching me the same way I'd been watching him. Why was my heart beating so fast? That night, he walked me to my apartment building. I didn't ask him to. He just did. When we got off the bus together, when he fell into step beside me without a word, I should have said something. Should have told him I was fine, that I'd walked these 6 blocks alone for 2 years and survived just fine. But the truth was, the neighborhood wasn't great. The street lights were broken more often than they worked, and there were always men lingering on corners, their eyes following me in a way that made my skin crawl. I walked fast, kept my head down, gripped my keys between my fingers like a weapon. But tonight, with Dante beside me, no one looked twice. We walked in silence, our footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. The rain had stopped, but everything was still slick and shining under the occasional working streetlight. I was hyper-aware of him, the way he matched his pace to mine, the way he positioned himself between me and the street, the way his presence seemed to create a bubble of safety around us. When we reached my apartment building, a run-down complex with peeling paint and a security door that hadn't locked properly in months, I stopped at the entrance. He stood there in the hallway light, rain still caught in his dark hair, droplets clinging to his jacket, and I realized with a sharp, painful clarity that I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment, didn't want to check on Emma sleeping at the neighbors, didn't want this moment to end. "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to sound casual even though my voice came out strained. He tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" "Look out for me. Walk me home. I'm fine on my own." The words felt hollow even as I said them. I've been doing this alone for a long time. His eyes held mine, dark and intense in the dim light. There was something in his expression I couldn't read, something that made my pulse quicken. "I know you are," he said simply. Not, "You need me," not, "Let me protect you," just acknowledgement. He knew I was capable, knew I was strong, but he was here anyway, and somehow that made it mean more. "Good night, Mara," he said softly, and then he turned and walked back into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, watching him go, my heart doing things it had no business doing. But he came back the next night. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him, told myself I wasn't disappointed when the bus pulled up and I didn't see him through the windows, told myself I wasn't relieved when he stepped on board 3 stops later, his dark eyes finding mine immediately across the crowded bus. And the next night, always on the same bus, always locking me home. He never tried to come inside, never asked to, never pushed for anything more than those quiet walks through my neighborhood, our shoulders occasionally brushing, our conversations soft and careful. And every time the air between us grew heavier, charged with something I was too afraid to name, something that felt like inevitability, like we were both moving toward something we couldn't stop even if we wanted to. I started looking forward to those walks more than I should have, started taking a little more care getting ready for work, started using the uniform that was less stained, started actually trying with my hair, started feeling disappointed on the rare nights when he wasn't on the bus, started feeling things I hadn't felt in years, started feeling dangerous. My daughter noticed him first. It was a Saturday morning, one of my rare days off. Emma and I were eating cereal at our tiny kitchen table when she suddenly hopped down from her chair and ran to the window. "Who's that man, Mommy?" My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. "What man, baby?" "The one down there, by the bus stop." I set down my spoon carefully and walked over to the window, my heart already knowing what I'd see before I looked. She was peeking through the window, her small hands pressed against the glass, watching Dante wait by the bus stop below. He was just standing there, in jeans and a dark shirt, hands in his pockets, looking up at our building like he was waiting for something, like he was making sure we were okay. How long had he been doing this? Coming by even on days when I didn't work? Even when he knew I wouldn't be on the bus? I pulled the curtain shut too quickly, my hands shaking slightly. "Just someone from the bus," I said, my voice not quite steady. Emma looked up at me with those big, knowing eyes that saw way too much for a 5-year-old. "He's always there." My throat felt tight. "I know, baby." She climbed back into her chair, swinging her legs, studying me with an expression that was far too perceptive. "Do you like him?" Her question hit me harder than it should have, harder than anything my ex had ever said to me, because it was so simple, so innocent, and so impossibly complicated all at once. I sat down slowly, buying time, pushing my cereal around in the bowl. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you smile different when you see him. You smile like you mean it." God, when had my daughter become so observant? When had she learned to read me so well? Because the truth was, I did. I liked the way he made me feel safe without making me feel weak. I liked the way he never pushed, never demanded, never asked for more than I could give. I liked the way he listened when I talked about Emma, the way his expression would soften when I mentioned something she'd done or said. I liked the way he never made me feel guilty for being a single mom, never made me feel like I was damaged goods or a burden, or any of the things my ex had made me feel. I liked that he saw me, not as a struggling single mom, not as a waitress, not as someone broken and barely holding it together, as a person, as Mara, as someone worth knowing, worth walking home, worth waiting for. But I also knew better. I'd learned my lesson the hard way. Men like Dante, mysterious, guarded, with shadows in their eyes and secrets they wouldn't share, they couldn't stick around. They couldn't. Whatever he was involved in, whatever made him so careful with his words and so watchful of his surroundings, it wasn't the kind of life that made room for a single mom and her kindergartner. And I had a daughter to protect, a little girl who'd already lost one father. I couldn't afford to be reckless with my heart, couldn't afford to let someone in who might leave, couldn't afford to let Emma get attached to someone who would eventually disappear. "Eat your cereal, baby," I said finally, avoiding the question. But Emma's words haunted me for the rest of the weekend. So I started taking a different bus. The decision felt both necessary and like self-preservation. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep letting myself fall for someone I barely knew, someone who was clearly dangerous in ways I didn't understand, someone who could hurt me and Emma in ways we might not recover from. I changed my route, left work 15 minutes earlier to catch the 11:32 instead of the 11:47. It was more crowded, less convenient, meant I got home later because of the transfers, but it was safer. Emotionally safer. It lasted 4 days. 4 days of telling myself I was doing the right thing. 4 days of ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest. 4 days of pretending I didn't scan every dark-haired man I passed, hoping and dreading that it might be him. 4 days of Emma asking why I was sad. On the 5th day, he showed up at the diner where I worked. I was in the middle of the lunch rush, that chaotic period between noon and 2 when every table was full and everyone wanted their food 5 minutes ago. I was refilling coffee for a regular, an older man who came in every day and always left exactly $1 tip, when I saw him slide into a booth by the window. My hands shook. The coffee pot tilted, hot coffee splashed onto the counter, onto my hand, burning. "Damn it," I muttered, grabbing a rag, my hand stinging but my eyes locked on Dante across the diner. He looked different here, out of place, too expensive, too controlled, too everything against the backdrop of cracked vinyl booths and yellowing linoleum. He was wearing dark jeans and a black shirt, casual clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and he was watching me with that same unreadable expression. But there was something else there, too. Something that looked like relief, like he'd been worried. My coworker, Janet, elbowed me. "You gonna stand there bleeding, or are you gonna get that man his menu?" I looked down. My hand was red from the coffee burn. I wrapped the rag around it and took a breath. "I've got it," I said. When I finally worked up the courage to approach his table, when I forced my feet to carry me across the diner to where he sat, he was watching me with that same unreadable expression. But his eyes dropped to my bandaged hand, and something dark flickered across his face. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. Defensive, because seeing him here, in my space, in the place where I felt most invisible, made everything too real. "You stopped taking the bus." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement, but somehow that made it worse. "So?" I crossed my arms, trying to put distance between us even though we were standing 2 feet apart. "I'm allowed to take different routes." "So I wanted to make sure you were okay." The concern in his voice made my chest ache, made me angry because I didn't want him to care, didn't want to care that he cared. I set down my notepad harder than necessary, the sound sharp in the relative quiet of the lunch lull. "I don't need you checking up on me, Dante. I'm not your responsibility. I'm not anything to you." Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe. Pain. Something raw and real that he couldn't quite hide fast enough. But it was gone too fast for me to be sure, locked behind those walls he kept so carefully maintained. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice flat. Empty. "You're not." He stood up to leave, reaching into his pocket for his wallet even though he hadn't ordered anything, and panic clawed up my throat, sharp and unexpected and overwhelming. Why did it feel like I was making a terrible mistake? Why did watching him walk away feel like losing something I'd never even had? "Wait." The word burst out before I could stop it, desperate, pleading. He stopped, his back to me, his shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't turn around, thought he'd just leave and I'd never see him again, and this would become just another story of a connection I'd ruined because I was too scared to try. "Why do you care?" The question came out broken, desperate, all my defenses crumbling. "You don't even know me. You don't know anything about me, about my life, about—" He turned slowly. The look in his eyes made my breath catch, made everything else fade away. The diner, the curious looks from customers, Janet pretending not to watch from behind the counter, everything disappeared, except him and me, and the truth hanging between us. "I know you work 2 jobs to keep your daughter fed. I know you fall asleep on buses because you never stop moving, because you can't afford to stop. I know you pretend you're fine when you're falling apart. I know you keep every drawing your daughter makes like they're treasures. I know you always order the chicken fingers for her because they're her favorite. I know you haven't bought yourself new shoes even though yours have holes in them because Emma needed winter boots." How did he know all that? How had he been paying such close attention? He stepped closer, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there and listen. "And I know." His voice dropped to something raw and honest, something that sounded like a confession. "I know I think about you every moment I'm not near you. I know I take that bus every night hoping you'll be there. I know I wait by your building on weekends just to make sure you're safe. I know I'm probably crossing every line here, but I can't stop. I don't want to stop." The diner disappeared. The noise, the people, the sizzle of the grill and the clatter of dishes, and Janet's pointed cough. Everything. There was just him. Just us. Just this moment that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "You can't say things like that," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why not?" "Because I'll believe you. Because I want to believe you so badly it scares me. Because I've been hurt before and I have Emma to think about and I can't just—" "Then believe me," he said simply. "I'm not him. I'm not whoever hurt you before." I wanted to. God, I wanted to.
wanted to believe that this could be real, that this connection I felt wasn't just loneliness and exhaustion making me see things that weren't there. Wanted to believe that someone could actually see me, want me, choose me. But I'd been hurt before. I'd trusted before. I'd believed in promises that turned to ash. And I had more than just myself to think about now. I had a little girl who'd already lost one father. I had a daughter who needed stability and safety, and a mother who made smart choices, even when those choices felt like tearing my own heart out. "I need time," I said finally, the words barely audible. He nodded slowly, something like understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The promise hung between us, fragile and precious and terrifying. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Not on a bus, not at the diner, not in any of the places where we'd built our careful routine.
But on the news. It was a Tuesday morning. Emma was at the kitchen table, coloring another masterpiece. I was making coffee, still half asleep, the TV droning in the background with the local news I never really watched, just background noise to fill the silence. Then I heard his name. Authorities are investigating alleged connections between local businessman Dante Morelli and organized crime. Sources say Morelli, 34, has ties to the Constantino family, one of the city's oldest. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. The sound was deafening in our small kitchen. Ceramic shards exploded across the linoleum. Hot coffee splashed against my bare feet, burning, but I couldn't feel it. Couldn't feel anything except the cold dread spreading through my chest like ice water. Dante Morelli. That was his full name, his real name. The name I'd never thought to Google, never thought to question because I'd been too caught up in the way he made me feel. Mafia ties, money laundering, violence, racketeering, words that didn't belong in the same sentence as the man who'd walked me home, who'd listened when I talked about my daughter, who'd looked at me like I was something precious. No. That couldn't be the same man. It couldn't be. "Mommy?" Emma's voice cut through my panic. "Mommy, you're bleeding." I looked down. Blood mixed with coffee on the floor. I'd stepped on broken ceramic, but I hadn't even felt it. "It's okay, baby. Stay there. Don't move." My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone from the counter. I had to be sure, had to confirm this was some horrible mistake, some different Dante Morelli, some other man who just happened to share a name with. But when I pulled out my phone and searched his name with trembling fingers, there he was. Same dark eyes staring at me from my phone screen, same sharp jaw, same face that had made me feel safe, now labeled as a suspected criminal. There were multiple photos. Dante in an expensive suit outside would look like a courthouse. Dante getting into a black car. Dante's face circled in red beside photos of known mobsters. I felt sick. Physically, violently sick. My stomach heaved and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. How had I not seen it? All the signs had been there. The expensive clothes that didn't match late-night bus rides, the vague answers about his work, the way he carried himself like danger was second nature, the way people seemed to instinctively move out of his way, the shadows in his eyes that I'd found mysterious instead of alarming. God, I'd been so stupid, so unbelievably stupid. My daughter called from her room asking what broke, and I realized I was crying. Hot tears streaming down my face, my breath coming in short gasps, my whole body shaking with the force of trying to hold myself together. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I called back, my voice cracking on every word. "Just drop something. Stay in your room for a minute, okay?" How could I have been so stupid? How could I have let him close, let him into my life, into my thoughts, nearly into my heart, when he was exactly the kind of danger I'd sworn to protect her from? Emma was everything, my whole world, my reason for breathing, and I'd almost brought a mobster into her life, almost let her get attached to someone who what? Hurt people? Killed people? I didn't even know what he'd done, what he was capable of, and that made it so much worse.
I cleaned up the broken mug with shaking hands, barely feeling the cuts as I picked up the pieces, cleaned the blood and coffee from the floor, put a Band-Aid on my foot, went through all the motions like a robot while my mind raced. I had to end this, had to protect Emma, had to make sure Dante Morelli stayed far, far away from us. I blocked his number, my finger hovering over his contact for a long moment before I could bring myself to do it. Deleted every text message we'd exchanged. They'd been brief anyway, just running late or see you tomorrow. Changed my route back to the earlier bus, stopped going to the corner store where I'd sometimes see him, avoided the diner booth where he'd sat, stopped going to places I thought he might find me. For 3 days, I jumped at every sound, checked the windows constantly, looked over my shoulder on the walk home, kept Emma close, maybe too close, until she asked why I was being so weird. Just tired, baby, I told her, another lie to add to the collection. But 3 days later, there was a knock on my door. It was late, almost 10. Emma was asleep in her room. I was folding laundry, trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander to dark eyes and dangerous smiles. The knock came again, firm, insistent, not threatening, but not casual either. I knew it was him before I opened it. Don't ask me how. Some part of me just knew. I looked at the peephole first, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dante stood in the hallway, and he looked different. So different that it made my chest ache. Tired, raw, like he'd been stripped of whatever armor he usually wore. His hair was messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. His clothes were rumpled. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. He looked like me. I opened the door but kept the chain on, kept that barrier between us. Mara, his voice cracked on my name. You need to leave. My voice was steadier than I expected, harder.
I know you saw the news. Of course he knew. Of course he'd been watching, waiting for this. Had he known this was coming? Had he been preparing for the moment I'd find out the truth? Then you know why you can't be here. My voice was shaking now, the steadiness crumbling. I have a daughter, Dante, a little girl who depends on me to keep her safe. I won't put her in danger, not for anyone, not even. I couldn't finish that sentence, couldn't say not even for you, because that would mean admitting how much he'd come to mean to me in such a short time. You think I would ever let anything happen to her? The intensity in his voice made me step back, made my hand instinctively reach for the door to close it. You think I'd let anything happen to you? Either of you? His eyes were wild, desperate, more emotion than I'd ever seen from him. It doesn't matter what you'd let happen. My voice rose, and I had to force it back down so I wouldn't wake Emma. You're involved in things I don't understand, dangerous things, illegal things, things that get people hurt or killed or. My voice cracked. I can't risk her. I can't. He dragged a hand through his hair, the gesture rough, frustrated, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked lost, completely, utterly lost. Can I come in? Please? His voice was quiet now, pleading. Just for 5 minutes. Let me explain. No. The word came out sharp, final. You need to say whatever you came to say and leave. He flinched like I'd hit him, but he nodded, accepting the boundary. Everything they're saying, he took a breath, choosing his words carefully. It's not the whole truth, but it's not all lies either. Somehow that was worse than if he denied everything. He met my eyes, and I saw the weight of whatever he was carrying. I was born into this life, Mara. I didn't choose it. My father, my grandfather, 3 generations back, it's all we've ever known. And I've spent the last 5 years trying to get out, trying to build something clean, something real, something legitimate. But it's not that simple. You can't just walk away from a family like mine. There are obligations, debts, loyalties that go back decades. Then make it simple, I said, and I was crying now, tears streaming down my face that I didn't bother to wipe away. Just make it simple, Dante. Walk away. From what? From all of it, from that life, from the family, from whatever it is they want you to do, just choose something different. God, I sounded naive even to my own ears, like it was that easy, like people could just decide to stop being who they were. From all of it, from that life. He stepped closer to the door, and I should have backed away, should have slammed it shut, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away from the pain in his eyes. "What if I can't?" he said softly, and there was something in his voice that sounded like breaking, like backfire. "What if walking away means putting you in more danger than staying ever would? What if there are people who would use you to get to me? What if the only way to keep you safe is to stay close enough to protect you?" I didn't understand, didn't want to understand, didn't want to think about what it meant that knowing him, just knowing him, might have already put Emma and me at risk. "I need you to leave, Dante." My voice was barely a whisper now. "Please, just go." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something break behind his eyes, something that looked like hope dying, like acceptance of something he'd been trying to fight. Then he reached into his pocket. I tensed, some primal part of me afraid of what he might pull out, and he pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a number. Someone I trust, one of the good guys, federal agent, completely clean." He held it out through the crack in the door. "If you ever need help, any kind of help, doesn't matter what, you call, okay? Promise me you'll keep this." I took it with shaking hands, our fingers brushing for just a second, and even now, even with everything broken between us, I felt that spark, that connection that started on a bus and somehow became everything. "I meant what I said," he whispered, rough with emotion. "Every word. At the diner, everything. And if keeping you safe means staying away," he swallowed hard and I saw his throat work, "then I'll stay away. But I need you to know you changed everything for me, Mara. Everything." He turned to leave, his shoulders heavy with defeat, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to call him back, to unlock the chain and let him in, and listen to the full story, to believe that maybe there was a way through this. But I didn't. I couldn't. I watched him walk down the hallway, watched him disappear around the corner, watched the elevator doors close on the only man who'd made me feel alive in years. And I told myself it was the right choice, the only choice, the choice a good mother would make. I told myself that for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of going through the motions, 6 weeks of Emma asking why I was sad, 6 weeks of lying awake at night wondering if he was okay, if he'd gotten out, if he was safe. 6 weeks of carrying that folded piece of paper in my wallet like a talisman, until the night I came home and found my apartment door kicked in. The door was hanging open, the frame splintered, the lock completely destroyed. For a second, I just stood there in the hallway, my grocery bags hanging from my hands, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Then panic hit like a freight train. My blood turned to ice, my grocery bags hit the floor, eggs shattering, but I didn't care. I ran inside, my heart in my throat. "Emma? Emma?" My voice was shrill with terror, echoing off the walls of our violated home. I ran to her room, threw open the door. Empty. Her bed was made, her stuffed animals undisturbed. "She's fine. She's at your neighbor's." I whirled around so fast I almost fell. A man I'd never seen before stood in my doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, in an expensive suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. He had silver hair slicked back, cold blue eyes, and a smile that made my skin crawl. "Who the hell are you? Where's my daughter?" "I told you, she's safe. Mrs. Chen picked her up from school like usual. She's watching cartoons next door, completely unaware that her mother is about to have an important conversation." Terror froze my lungs. This man knew Emma's schedule, knew our neighbor, had been watching us. "Your ex-husband owes some very bad people a lot of money, Mara." His name hanged in the air. "And since he's disappeared, smart man really, knowing when to run, well," the man shrugged, casual, like we were discussing the weather, "they're looking to collect from his family instead. That would be you." "I haven't seen him in 3 years."
The words tumbled out desperately. "We're divorced. I don't have anything to do with him. I don't have—"
$60,000. He interrupted me, his voice cutting and cold. You have 1 week, 7 days. If you don't pay, there will be consequences. And I promise you, Mrs. Walker, you don't want to know what those consequences look like. $60,000. The number was so absurd it was almost funny. Almost, if I wasn't terrified out of my mind. I don't have that kind of money. I work at a diner. I can barely afford. Then I suggest you figure something out. He straightened his cuffs, completely unbothered by my panic. 1 week, Mrs. Walker. Don't make us come back. He left like he'd said nothing more important than the weather, just walked out of my destroyed apartment, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving me standing in the wreckage. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the floor, my back against the wall, shaking so hard I thought I might come apart. $60,000! I didn't have $60 in savings. I'd been putting off buying new work shoes because I couldn't afford them. How was I supposed to— The paper. The thought hit me like lightning. Dante's number. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my wallet out, could barely unfold the paper that I'd carried for 6 weeks, the paper I'd looked at 100 times without calling. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and dialed. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting, like he'd never stopped waiting. Mara? Just my name, just that one word, but the way he said it, relief and fear and hope all tangled together, it broke something in me. And I broke. I need help. The words came out as a sob. Dante, something happened and I don't know what to do, and Emma. I'm coming. Where are you? Home. But Dante, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. It took him 15. 20 minutes later, 15 actually, there was a knock on my door, different from before, a specific pattern that somehow I knew was him. I looked through the peephole first, and there he was. I threw the door open and he took one look at my face, tear-stained, panicked, terrified, and pulled me into his arms without a word. And I let myself fall apart against his chest. I let myself break down completely, my hands fisting in his shirt, my tears soaking through the fabric, my whole body shaking with the force of my sobs. And he just held me, solid and warm and safe, one hand in my hair, one arm wrapped tight around my waist, holding me together when I couldn't hold myself. Tell me everything, he said quietly, his voice calm despite the tension I could feel in his body. Take a breath. Then tell me everything. So I did. About my ex, how he disappeared 3 years ago, leaving me with nothing but debt and a daughter to raise alone. About the man in the expensive suit. About the threat. About $60,000 I'd never be able to pay. About Emma, sweet, innocent Emma, who had no idea that her deadbeat father had put her in danger. When I finished, when the words ran out and all that was left was fear, Dante's expression had gone cold in a way that should have scared me, but somehow didn't. Because that coldness wasn't directed at me, it was directed at whoever had dared to threaten us. It's already handled, he said, his voice flat and hard. I pulled back from his chest, confusion cutting through the panic. What? The debt, it's handled. No one will bother you again. Dante, you can't just... That's $60,000. I don't care if it was 600,000. His hands framed my face, gentle despite the steel in his voice, and the look in his eyes stole my breath. You called me, after everything, after pushing me away, after what you saw on the news, after I told you to stay away, you called me. Do you know what that means? My throat was too tight to speak. I just shook my head. What? I managed to whisper. What? It means you trust me, even a little.
even when you're scared, even when every logical part of you is screaming that you shouldn't. His thumbs brushed away my tears. And I will spend the rest of my life earning that trust, Mara. I swear to you, on everything I am, everything I have, I will keep you safe. Both of you. Tears spilled over again, but different this time. Not terror, something else. Something that felt like hope struggling to survive. Why? My voice broke on the word. Why do you care so much? You could walk away. You should walk away. I'm a mess. I have a kid. I come with an ex-husband who apparently owes money to dangerous people. I have nothing to offer you but complications and... Because from the moment you fell asleep on my shoulder, everything changed. His voice was rough, raw, honest in a way that made my chest ache. Because you looked at me like I was just a person, not a name or a reputation or a monster. Because your daughter draws pictures of sunshine and you keep them in your bag like they're made of gold. Because you work yourself to exhaustion to give her a good life. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of what they made me.
I kissed him. I didn't plan to, didn't think, didn't worry about whether it was smart or safe or right. I just rose up on my toes and pressed my mouth to his, desperate and grateful and terrified and hopeful all at once. And he made this sound, half surprise, half relief, like he'd been waiting for this, holding his breath for this, and kissed me back like I was air and he'd been drowning, like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. His hands tightened on my face, then slid into my hair, pulling me closer. My hands fisted in his shirt, holding on like he might disappear if I let go. The kiss was desperate and messy and perfect. It tasted like tears and coffee and coming home. When we finally broke apart, because we had to breathe, because Emma could come back any second, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing hard. "I'm still getting out," he whispered against my lips. "It'll take time. It'll be complicated and dangerous, and there will be moments when you'll want to run. But I'm doing it. For you. For Emma. For us." "Us," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue like it was brand new, like it was magic. "If you'll have me." I thought about all the reasons I should say no, all the danger he just confirmed, all the uncertainty, all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways loving him could destroy us. But I also thought about the way he made me feel safe, even when nothing was safe. The way he'd shown up again and again, even when I pushed him away. The way he answered on the first ring after 6 weeks of silence. The way he saw me, really saw me, all my mess and struggles and fear, and stayed anyway. "I'll have you," I whispered. His smile was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, devastating in its honesty, in its hope. It wasn't a perfect ending. We had challenges ahead, his past to untangle, my fears to face, a little girl who needed stability and answers we didn't have yet. There were investigations and dangers I didn't understand. There were choices he'd have to make that might break us before we even began. But as Dante held me in my broken apartment with the city lights glowing through the window, as Emma's laughter filtered through the walls from next door, as his heart beat steady and strong under my palm, I realized something. Love isn't about perfect timing or perfect people. It's about finding someone who makes you brave enough to try, someone who sees your mess and stays anyway, someone who fights for you even when you're too tired to fight for yourself, someone who answers when you call, even after you've pushed them away. I'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder on a transit bus, exhausted and invisible and barely surviving. And somehow I'd woken up to the rest of my life.